The room was already tense before she spoke. Crystal chandeliers hung low over polished marble floors, casting soft light on men who did not belong in the light at all. Every suit in the room was tailored. Every watch cost more than most houses. Every smile was practiced, careful, false. This was not a party. It was a gathering of power. Armed men stood along the walls pretending to be decor. Fingers rested near jackets. Eyes never stopped moving. Conversations stayed quiet, measured, controlled. No one laughed too loudly. No one moved without purpose. At the center of it all stood the old man. The father. The man whose name was never spoken casually. The man who had built an empire that crossed oceans and left bodies behind. Age had curved his spine slightly, slowed his step, but it had not softened him. His cane tapped against the marble floor, each sound deliberate, each step measured like a countdown. And trailing the edges of the room, unseen by most, moved the housemaid. She wore a plain black uniform. No jewelry. No makeup worth noticing. Her head stayed bowed, eyes lowered, posture carefully small. She blended into the walls the way she had been trained to do. Invisible. Replaceable. Safe. That was the rule. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not look up. Do not exist. She carried a tray of drinks past men who had ordered executions with the same calm they ordered wine. She passed conversations about territory, shipments, loyalty. None of it was meant for her ears. None of it acknowledged her presence. Until the old man stepped forward. The cane tapped once more. And for a fraction of a second, their paths crossed. It was nothing. An accident. A half step too far. A moment that should have passed without consequence. The tray tilted. She steadied it instinctively. And then, without thinking, she spoke. The words were soft. Respectful. Perfect. Pure Busan dialect. The effect was in its sentence, as if the air itself had been cut. A man froze with a glass halfway to his lips. Another's hand stalled inches from his jacket. A guard's fingers hovered near a concealed weapon, suddenly unsure. The old man's cane halted mid-tap. Silence fell. Not the comfortable kind. Not the polite kind. The kind that precedes violence. Slowly, deliberately, the old man lifted his head. His eyes, cold, sharp, unmissable, locked onto the woman in black. For the first time since entering the room, he did not look bored. He did not look distracted. He looked awake. The housemaid kept her eyes lowered, heart steady, face blank. But the damage was already done. The sound of her voice still echoed in the room, hanging there like smoke. Busan dialect wasn't something you learned from textbooks. It wasn't taught in classrooms or apps. It was lived. Absorbed. Earned in narrow streets and fish markets and back alley conversations. And everyone in that room knew it. A black housemaid did not speak like that. Not here. Not ever. The old man took one slow step closer. And in that moment, every man in the room understood the same terrifying truth. This woman was not who she appeared to be. And whatever she was, she had just changed everything. If power had a smell, it would have filled the mansion long before anyone spoke. Polished wood. Old money. Fresh fear. The estate sat on a hill just outside the city, hidden behind iron gates and manicured hedges that suggested elegance rather than control. But nothing about the place was accidental. Every camera was real. Every guard was armed. Every guest had been vetted twice, once officially, once quietly. Inside, the mansion breathed like a living thing. Low ceilings pressed down just enough to remind everyone who didn't own the place. Hallways curved instead of running straight, forcing guests to slow their pace. Rooms opened wide and then narrowed again, anyone realizing they were being guided. This was not a home. It was a statement. Men gathered in small clusters, speaking softly in Korean and English, their voices polished, their words careful. The hierarchy was visible to anyone who knew how to look. Who stood closest to the center? Who waited before speaking? Who laughed first and who waited to see if laughter was permitted? At the top of that invisible pyramid stood the sun. The Mafia boss. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He wore a dark suit without ornament, his expression neutral, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested he had never needed to prove himself. His eyes moved constantly, not darting, not nervous, just observant. Measuring. Recording. He watched the room the way a chess player watches a board several moves ahead. People spoke to him with respect wrapped in casual language. No one interrupted him. No one touched him without invitation. Even the guards, men who had ended lives without hesitation, kept a half-step of distance when they passed. He was calm. And calm, in a room like this, was dangerous. Nearby, surrounded by a quieter gravity, stood his father. The patriarch. Age had bent him slightly, thinned his hair, softened his hands. But the stories clung to him like a second skin. Men who remembered Busan decades ago remembered him differently, standing taller, moving faster, ruling through fear and loyalty in equal measure. He leaned on a cane now. Gold-tipped. Decorative to the untrained eye. No one doubted he could still order a man's death with a glance. And moving along the edges of the room, unnoticed by almost everyone, was the housemaid. She wore black from collar to cuff. Her shoes made no sound against the polished floors. Her movements were precise but unremarkable. When she entered a room, eyes slid past her as if she were part of the furniture. She kept her gaze lowered. Always. She had been trained that way. Don't draw attention. Don't look up. Don't exist unless you are needed. The rules had been explained to her clearly when she was hired. Not shouted. Not threatened. Simply stated, with a smile that didn't reach the eyes. This house hosts powerful people. They value discretion. You are here to serve, not to be seen. Speak only if spoken to. Move only when necessary. If you make yourself noticeable, you will not be corrected twice. She understood. She always did. She moved from room to room, refilling glasses that were already half full. Straightening coasters that hadn't shifted. Adjusting plates no one had touched. She listened without appearing to listen, absorbed without reacting. They talked around her. Never to her. They spoke of shipments delayed at ports. Of alliances that required reassurance. Of men who had become inconvenient. Names surfaced briefly, then disappeared again, swallowed by coded language and practiced silence. No one asked her name. No one met her eyes. That was the safety of invisibility. And also its cost. From her position near the wall, she could see everything. The subtle nods. The unspoken permissions. The way the sun deferred just slightly when his father shifted his weight or cleared his throat. Power flowed downward from that small, aging man with terrifying efficiency. She had seen rooms like this before. Different countries. Different houses. Same energy. Places where mistakes were not forgiven. Where silence was a survival skill. where being overlooked was the closest thing to protection a person like her could have. She paused briefly near a side table, waiting for an opening to pass through the crowd without interrupting. Her hands were steady, her breathing slow. If anyone noticed her at all, it was only to register her as background. A servant. A body meant to move things, not matter. And yet, the rules that governed her behavior, the bowed head, the measured steps, the careful distance from power, felt familiar in a way that they echoed older instructions. Lessons learned young. Lessons learned painfully. A ripple moved through the room as the patriarch shifted forward, signaling the next phase of the gathering. Conversations softened further. Glasses were set down. Attention narrowed. The son watched his father closely now, alert to changes others might miss. The guards adjusted their positions by inches. Control tightened. And the housemaid adjusted her path instinctively, recalculating where she could move without crossing anyone's line of sight. She was good at this. Too good. As she passed behind one of the clusters, a man gestured with his glass, nearly backing into her. She stopped instantly, retreating half a step without sound, eyes fixed on the floor. He never noticed. That was the expectation. That was the agreement. But invisibility, no matter how carefully maintained, is fragile. It depends on timing, on distance, on other people continuing to believe you don't matter. And all it takes to shatter it is one moment. One misstep. One word spoken when silence was required. Across the room, the patriarch began to move. The housemaid adjusted her grip on the tray and shifted her weight, preparing to pass behind him as she had passed behind dozens of men before. Head down. Silent. Gone before anyone registered she had been there. She did not yet know that the rules were about to fail her. She did not yet know that the safety of being unseen was about to vanish. And she did not yet know that the moment she crossed paths with the old man, everything she had carefully hidden would begin to surface. Slowly. Relentlessly. In a room where power noticed everything. She was about to be seen. The patriarch's entrance did not announce itself loudly. It didn't need to. The room adjusted around him instinctively, like a body responding to pain before the mind catches up. Conversations tapered off. Chairs shifted subtly to clear a path. Even the guards, men trained not to react, straightened their posture by degrees too small to be called obvious. The father was moving. His cane tapped once against the floor. Then again. The sound was soft, but it carried. The son noticed immediately. His head turned a fraction, eyes narrowing just enough to signal attention without concern. This was familiar territory to him, reading his father's movements, anticipating needs, adjusting the room before adjustments were requested. Control was maintained. The housemaid stood near the sideboard, waiting for the narrow window that would allow her to pass behind the gathering without crossing the old man's path. She calculated distances automatically, the way some people calculated time. 3 steps forward. Pause. Then through. She lowered her head further as the patriarch approached, shrinking herself into a moving shadow. Her grip tightened slightly on the tray, not from fear, but from habit. She had done this before. Different houses. Different men. Same rules. The patriarch slowed. It was barely perceptible, but it was enough. The space closed faster than expected. Their paths intersected. The tray tilted, not enough to spill, but enough to demand correction. Her hand moved before thought caught up, steadying the glasses with practiced ease. And then it happened. Not as a decision. Not as defiance. As instinct. The greeting slipped out of her mouth softly, naturally, shaped by muscle memory older than caution. Respectful. Proper. Perfect. Busan dialect. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the room fractured. A laugh died mid-breath. A man froze with his mouth open, words abandoned. A chair scraped slightly as someone shifted too fast and then stopped, realizing the mistake. Security stiffened as one. Hands hovered near jackets. Eyes snapped toward the sound. Training kicked in before understanding did. The sun turned sharply. Not slowly. Not casually. Sharply. His gaze cut across the room and landed on the source of the voice with surgical precision. He had not been watching her before. He was watching her now. The patriarch stopped walking. The cane halted mid-tap, suspended against the marble floor. Silence poured into the space, thick and absolute. The housemaid felt it immediately, not as fear, but as pressure. The kind that pressed inward, compressing time, making every breath feel louder than it should. She lowered her eyes instantly. Too late. She shifted her weight back, retreating half a step, shrinking again into the role she had violated. Her face smoothed into neutrality. No expression. No challenge. No explanation. She said nothing. The rules demanded silence. The staff nearest to her exchanged quick, terrified glances. One of them swallowed hard. Another stared at the floor as if willing it to open. No one spoke. The patriarch lifted his head slowly. Up close, the signs of age were clearer. Fine lines around his eyes. Hands spotted with time. But the gaze itself, sharp, focused, unsettling, belonged to a man who had never needed to ask twice. His eyes fixed on her. Not scanning. Not passing over. Fixing. He studied her face as if something about it had interrupted a long, familiar pattern. As if a sound from the past had echoed where it didn't belong. For a moment, he said nothing. That was worse. The son felt it too. He took a step closer, not to protect her, but to better see her. To place her within a framework that suddenly no longer fit. A maid did not speak like that. Not here. Not ever. The patriarch tilted his head slightly. You are not Korean, he said in English, his accent heavy, his tone flat. It was not a question. No, sir, the housemaid replied quietly, eyes still lowered. Her voice was controlled now. Subdued. Exactly what it was supposed to be. Another pause. The patriarch's gaze sharpened. Then why, he continued, switching languages effortlessly, do you speak like someone who? The words landed softly. But their weight was crushing. A few of the men exchanged glances. Someone inhaled sharply and stopped. The air felt thinner, as if the room itself had leaned in. The housemaid did not answer immediately. She shouldn't. Anything she said now would draw attention. Attention was dangerous. Attention led to questions, and questions led to truths that had been buried for a reason. She bowed her head slightly, deeper than required. I apologize, she said in English. I spoke without thinking. It was a retreat. A carefully placed one. The patriarch did not accept it. He took one step closer. The cane tapped once, firmly, reclaiming its sound. Answer me, he said in Korean. Not loud. Not angry. Simply certain. The son watched her carefully now. He had seen fear before. He had caused it. He knew what it looked like when someone realized they were out of their depth. But that wasn't what he saw on her face. What he saw was restraint. Measured. Deliberate. As if she were choosing her next move with care. She swallowed once, barely noticeable. "I learned it where I grew up," she said. A half-truth. The patriarch's eyes narrowed. "Where?" Another silence. Longer this time. The housemaid shifted her weight again, retreating a fraction, as though the floor itself might absorb her if she moved slowly enough. "I am sorry, sir," she said. "I did not mean to cause offense." The staff held their breath. The patriarch studied her for another moment. Something unreadable moved behind his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or memory pressing against the present. Then he spoke again. This time, his voice was calm. Too calm. "Where," he repeated, "did you learn to speak like that?" The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. And every man in the room understood the same thing at once. This was no longer a mistake. It was an opening. And whatever lay behind it was about to be exposed. The patriarch did not raise his voice. Instead, he changed languages. "Kamasio," he said quietly. "Not Seoul. Not textbook. Busan." The word carried weight, regional, informal, lived in. The kind of phrasing that only surfaced when someone stopped performing and started remembering. The housemaid froze for a fraction of a second. It was subtle. Almost invisible. But the father saw it. Her shoulders tightened. Not in fear, but in recognition. She answered before caution could interfere. "Yi, Yaruzan." Her response came out just as naturally. Same register. Same rhythm. Same unpolished warmth that marked a speaker who had learned the language on the street, not in a classroom. A murmur threatened to rise from the table. It died before it could form. The patriarch's eyes sharpened. He took another step closer, not aggressively, but deliberately closing the space until he could see her clearly without raising his voice. "You didn't learn that from lessons," he said. She lowered her eyes again, but this time the gesture felt different. Less submissive. More restrained. "No, sir." The son leaned back slightly in his chair. He wasn't relaxed. He was recalibrating. The patriarch continued, switching phrases with precision now, like a craftsman selecting tools. "Iadi gadian saiganai nia mupali ganyanda, girochi?" The sentence was casual. Nostalgic. Something an older man might say over drinks. It wasn't meant to test vocabulary. It was meant to test memory. She answered instantly. "Gorio sumnida. Guten Morajasio." Yes. Time goes too fast. Back then, you don't realize it. Perfect. Not perfect in grammar. Perfect in feeling. A few men at the table shifted uncomfortably. One of them frowned, trying to place what felt wrong about the exchange. Another stared openly now, suspicion beginning to override etiquette. The patriarch smiled. Just slightly. It wasn't warmth. It was confirmation. "You speak like someone who didn't just live in Busan," he said. "You speak like someone who belonged there." Thicker now. The housemaid did not respond. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly. The son's eyes flicked between his father and the woman standing in front of them. He had seen interrogations break men twice her size. He had watched trained operatives fold under less pressure. She was still standing. Still silent. Still choosing her words carefully. "What is your name?" the patriarch asked. The question cut deeper than the others. Names were dangerous. Names anchored people to histories, to places, to networks that could be traced, pulled apart, exploited. She hesitated. Just long enough for everyone to notice. "My name is Nia," she said at last. "Sir." The patriarch tilted his head. "That's not Korean." "No." Another pause. The son spoke for the first time since the questioning began. And before that, he asked calmly, "What name did you use before this house?" The staff stiffened. This was no longer curiosity. This was extraction. Nia inhaled slowly. "I've used many names," she said. "This is the one that matters here." The patriarch studied her again. Longer this time. He wasn't offended. He was intrigued. "You're careful," he said. "That's good. Careful people survive longer." A few of the men exchanged looks. Survival was not a word used lightly in this room. The patriarch turned away slightly, walking back toward his seat. The cane tapped twice, reasserting rhythm, reasserting control. But something had changed. The room no longer felt settled. He stopped halfway. Without turning around, he spoke again. "You will serve us personally tonight." The words landed softly. But they struck like a verdict. Every head snapped up. That was not protocol. Housemaids did not serve the inner circle. They did not remain in the room. They certainly were not assigned directly by the patriarch himself. The son's eyes narrowed. "Father," he said carefully. The old man raised a hand. Silence. He turned back to face Nia. He continued, "You will pour the drinks. You will remain close. You will listen. Listen. Not work. Not clean. Listen." Nia bowed deeply. "Yes, sir." Her voice was steady. But inside, something shifted. She had crossed an invisible line. And the most dangerous man in the room had noticed. The patriarch lowered himself into his chair. The meeting resumed. But no one spoke the same way again. Because now, the invisible woman had been seen. And whatever she was hiding had just become relevant. The dinner was not announced. It never was. Food appeared in this house the same way decisions did, silently, efficiently, without discussion. The long table was cleared with minimal movement, plates removed as if they had never been there at all. Nia remained. Standing just behind the patriarch's chair. Still. Unassuming. Present. The son noticed the positioning immediately. It wasn't random. She stood at a respectful angle, close enough to hear, far enough not to intrude. Exactly where someone trained around power would place themselves. Not where a maid was taught to stand. The dishes arrived in pairs, carried by junior staff who avoided eye contact and spoke only when addressed. Nia guided them with subtle gestures, 2 fingers raised slightly, a pause of breath, a single nod. No words. They followed instantly. She adjusted the placement of the bowls herself. Not dramatically. Just enough to align them according to hierarchy. Eldest first. Right side favored. Distance measured. Traditional. Old school. The kind of etiquette that hadn't been written down in decades. The patriarch watched her hands. Not her face. Hands never lied. She poured the first drink without being told. Rice wine. Slightly warmed. Poured in a slow, steady stream, stopping just before the lip of the cup, never filling it completely. a sign of respect that had faded from modern practice. The patriarch did not comment. He simply lifted the cup. Drank. The son felt something tighten in his chest. Man preferred. She knew. A plate shifted near the edge of the table. One of the men reached for his glass, hesitated, then withdrew his hand, unsure. Nia stepped in immediately. She adjusted the plate first, correcting the alignment, then poured. Perfect sequence. No eye contact. No acknowledgement. Just precision. The son leaned back slightly, studying her openly now. This wasn't mimicry. This wasn't someone copying what they had seen once or twice. This was memory. Lived memory. Men spoke in low tones as the meal progressed. Deals hinted at. Names avoided. The conversation stayed deliberately vague, but the air around it was sharp. Dangerous. Nia didn't flinch. She moved when movement was needed. Paused when silence was required. She refilled cups before they were empty. Cleared dishes before anyone reached the point of irritation. She anticipated. That was the problem. Anticipation meant familiarity. At one point, the patriarch paused mid-sentence. The room stilled instantly. Nia had already stepped forward, adjusting the cushion behind his back by a single inch, just enough to ease the pressure on his spine. The patriarch exhaled slowly. Comfort. The son's eyes narrowed. That gesture wasn't something you learned watching from a distance. That was something you learned by being close to men like this. For a long time. One of the younger men spoke too quickly, too loudly. A mistake. Before the son could react, Nia placed a fresh cup in front of him. Not as an offering. As a correction. The man stopped talking. Lowered his head. The exchange lasted less than 2 seconds. But it changed the temperature of the room. The son looked at her again. This time, there was no dismissal in his gaze. Only calculation. The patriarch spoke again, casually, as if discussing the weather. You handle yourself well. Nia bowed her head slightly. I was taught properly. By whom? She didn't answer. The silence stretched. Not awkward. Deliberate.
If strength wasn't loud, if strength wasn't confidence, if strength wasn't control, then what was it? He replayed moments from his own life. Times he stayed when things air uncomfortable. Times he endured quietly. Times he carried weight no one noticed. Were those moments weakness? Or something else? The question followed him. He didn't have an answer, and that unsettled him more than doubt ever had. Because doubt had given him an excuse. This question did not. He stood at the edge of a realization, but couldn't step into it yet. If his definition of strength was wrong, then the problem was bigger than fear. It meant he might have been measuring himself against the wrong standard all along. And if that were true, then he wasn't weak. But he wasn't sure what he was either. The certainty he once leaned on was gone, replaced with something quieter, unfinished. And as he moved forward, one thought refused to leave him. If strength isn't what I thought it was, then what happens when I'm finally tested? It didn't happen all at once. That's how breaking really works. It starts with pressure, quiet, unnoticed, and then one day it becomes too much. The crisis arrived without asking if he was ready. A responsibility fell on his shoulders, one he could not avoid, one he could not pass to someone louder, one that demanded presence, not confidence. Something went wrong, not a small mistake, not something that could be quietly corrected, a failure that rippled outward. People were affected. Consequences followed. Eyes turned toward him, and in that moment, everything he feared arrived at once. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. His heart raced, not from weakness, but from the weight of expectation. He looked around for the people everyone called strong. The confident ones, the decisive ones, the voices that usually filled the room. They were silent. Some avoided eye contact. Some shifted responsibility. Some disappeared entirely. The ones he believed suddenly, would lead. The truth became impossible to ignore. Strength, at least the kind he had believed in, was absent when it mattered most. The pressure intensified. Voices rose. Accusations surfaced. Fear spread quickly. He felt it inside his chest. The instinct to retreat, to step back, to disappear the way he always had. His mind raced. I can't handle this. I'm not strong enough. I'll make it worse. The old belief clawed its way back. And for a moment, just a moment, he almost gave in. But there was nowhere to go. No one else stepped forward. So he stayed. Not because he felt brave. Not because he felt capable. Because leaving would cost more than staying. The hours stretched. Every decision felt heavy. Every word felt dangerous. Mistakes loomed. And then it happened. The confident figure from before, the one everyone admired, returned. But not as a leader. As a shield. They spoke loudly. Defensively. Desperately. They tried to control the narrative. To protect their image. And when that failed, they broke. Not quietly this time. Anger surfaced. Blame exploded. They refused responsibility. And walked away. The moment landed like a blow. He stood there, surrounded by chaos. Watching strength, as he wants to find it, collapse in real time. And suddenly, he understood the cost of illusion. While others protected themselves, he absorbed the impact. While others escaped, he stayed with the consequences. The situation did not improve quickly. There were losses. There were setbacks. There were moments when he felt completely exposed. But something unexpected happened. He didn't break. Not dramatically. Not heroically. He endured. He listened. He responded carefully. He owned what he could and carried what he couldn't fix yet. People noticed. Not immediately, but slowly. In the silence between accusations. In the steady tone of his voice. In the way he remained when others fled. The chaos peaked. Everything felt unstable. In the quiet aftermath. Uncertain. He stood alone. Exhausted. Shaken. The world felt different now. Not because it had changed, but because his illusions had. He had been tested. Not in the way he imagined. Not in the way he prepared for. And he was still standing. That realization hit harder than the crisis itself. Strength hadn't shown up as confidence. It hadn't arrived as fearlessness. It hadn't announced itself at all. It had revealed itself through endurance. But the cost was heavy. As the dust settled, he felt the weight of what had been lost, and the weight of what could no longer be denied. Something inside him had shifted. The question was no longer theoretical. It was personal. If this was strength, then why did it feel so painful? And more importantly, if this was strength, what would it demand next? That night, the world went quiet. Not peaceful, just empty. The kind of silence that arrives after something breaks. He sat alone. The lights were off. The room barely visible. His body felt heavy, not from work, but from everything he had carried without realizing it. The day replayed itself in fragments. Voices, faces, moments where he almost stepped away, moments where he stayed. His chest tightened as the truth surfaced. He had been afraid of this moment his entire life. The moment where strength would be tested. And yet, he was still here, still breathing, still standing, exhausted but unbroken. The realization didn't come all at once. It unfolded slowly, quietly, like something long buried finally reaching the surface. Strength was never the absence of fear. He had felt fear, deeply. Strength was not confidence that never wavered. His confidence had cracked more than once. Strength was endurance, staying when everything inside you begs you to leave. Strength was choosing to stand again, when a weight feels unbearable. Strength was discipline in the dark, when no one is watching, when no one is praising, moments he when there is nothing to prove. The times he stayed quiet but steady, the pressure he absorbed without recognition, the responsibility he carried without applause. Those moments weren't weakness. They were training. He had mistaken silence for fragility, endurance for insignificance, restraint for fear, and suddenly, Everything made sense. Strength had never been something he lacked. It was something he misunderstood. It didn't arrive when a crisis hit. It didn't appear when others disappeared. It had been there long before, waiting, unacknowledged, unused. The thought landed gently, but firmly. Strength didn't arrive. It was already there. A breath escaped him. Not relief. Release. The kind that comes when you stop fighting the truth. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to compare himself to anyone. Not the loud, not the confident, not the admired. Their definition of strength no longer applied to him. He had faced pressure. He had endured. He had stayed. And that changed everything. The exhaustion was still there. The consequences were still real. But something fundamental had shifted. He wasn't waiting for permission anymore. He wasn't waiting to feel strong. He knew it now. And knowing it didn't make him loud. It made him grounded, calm, unshakable in a way he had never felt before. He stood up slowly, not energized, not inspired, resolved, because strength, he realized, is not about how you feel in the moment. It's about what you choose. Well, the moment demands everything. And tonight, in the quiet aftermath, with no audience, no applause, no recognition, he chose to stand. Change did not happen overnight. There was no sudden surge of energy, no dramatic declaration, no moment where the world noticed all at once. The next morning came quietly. He woke up tired, still sore, still carrying the weight of what had happened. But something was different. He didn't wait to feel ready. But because he got up, not because he needed to announce itself. The days that followed were ordinary. Work continued. Responsibilities remained. Consequences still needed to be faced. But his relationship with difficulty had changed. When pressure appeared, he didn't retreat. He didn't rush either. He stayed. He listened more carefully. He spoke when it mattered. He chose consistency over comfort. There were no witnesses to most of it. No one applauded when he showed up early. No one noticed when he stayed late. No one congratulated him for doing what needed to be done. And that was enough. He stopped measuring himself against others. Stopped waiting for validation. Stopped needing proof. Strength, he learned, grows in repetition, in the quiet discipline of doing the right thing again and again, especially when no one is watching. Weeks passed, then months. People began to notice something, though they couldn't quite name it. He hadn't become louder. He hadn't become aggressive. He hadn't changed who he was, but he carried himself differently. When challenges came, he didn't avoid them. When conflict appeared, he didn't disappear. When uncertainty arrived, he didn't panic. He stood, calm, measured, present, and slowly, the label that once followed him began to fade. Not because he demanded respect, but because he earned trust. People stopped speaking over him, stopped overlooking him, stopped mistaking quiet for weakness. Not because he proved anything, but because he no longer needed to. The strongest change wasn't visible. It was internal. He no longer feared pressure. He no longer feared being tested. He no longer feared discovering his limits. Because he had already faced the hardest truth. He was strong, not in the way he once imagined, but in the way that lasts. And now, when he moved forward, he did so without urgency, without performance, without doubt, just steady progress, just quiet power, the kind of strength that doesn't ask to be seen, and the kind that remains. Long after the noise fades, that if this story felt familiar, it's because it wasn't really about him. It was about you, about the moments you stayed silent when you wanted to speak, the times you stepped back when you could have stepped forward, the weight you've carried quietly, believing it meant you were falling behind. You're not weak for feeling tired. You're not broken for doubting yourself. And you're not behind because your strength doesn't look loud. Real strength isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move anyway. It's showing up on the days no one claps. It's choosing discipline over comfort. It's standing again, not because you feel ready, but because you refuse to disappear. If you're waiting for confidence to arrive, stop. It doesn't arrive. It's built, slowly, quietly, through choices no one sees. And if today all you can do is take one small step, that's enough. Because strength was never something you had to become. It was always something you already were. So don't rush. Don't compare. Just keep going. And if this story found you at the right moment, Stay with us. Not for motivation, but for alignment. You're stronger than you